Being curious is one of the greatest gifts that anyone could ever have. The whole notion of being curious about, tell me more about, I wonder how, not only does it solve a lot of conflicts, it also gives us a lot of information on things that we need to know.
This is the Engaging Leadership Show where we uncover the stories and strategies behind successful educational leadership. In today's episode, we're going to talk about leadership at a relatively large elementary school in a diverse community. And so leading in a very complex, dynamic environment while being able to reflect and build relationships while building systems. There's a lot of very practical nuggets in today's episode, so stay tuned and listen in to the Engaging Leadership Show. Today's guest is an educator with over 20 years of experience. She's been in the classroom, she's been in district administration, and she's also been in site administration where she is today. She holds a master's degree in educational leadership and administration from San Jose State University. And it's a great privilege for me to welcome to the show today, Lisa Aguirre-Lewis. She's the principal of Luigi Aprea Elementary School in Gilroy Unified School District out here in California. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Lisa, tell us a little bit more about your school and the community that you serve.
I'm very thankful to be the principal of Luigi Aprea Elementary School in Gilroy. We are a small town. I have about 740-ish students here. We're a diverse population. The great thing about my school is right before COVID, one of the schools in Gilroy Unified closed due to declining enrollment. And that school that closed had a very different population than the students that were currently at Luigi. And half of those students then went to Luigi Aprea. So it's two different communities that had to come together. Through COVID, the bonding and the community building didn't happen as much as it could have. And I have the privilege of continuing on that journey to bring everyone together and make sure that we all understand that it's one school, one community.
I love how you've made lemonade out of the lemon of COVID.
Yes, there's a lot of, we can look back on that time and there's a lot of wounds, but then we can also look at all the bright spots that happen.
Yeah, I think you're taking the right attitude, because how are you going to make healing happen if you don't want the healing or don't hope for it? But it's really great to hear how those very diverse communities, people and kids are all coming together. And this really is the theme for what we're going to talk about, because an elementary school of 700, it's not a small school and there's a lot going on. So at the same time, if you're working with a really diverse set of parents, families, and the community, that can also pose some challenges. So when we think about what you had to do coming in and working things through COVID, we spoke earlier about both relationships and systems, and having that balance between letting individuals have autonomy, but at the same time having to have certain things standardized, because it's not a small school that you have to run. So talk to me about your thinking around all of this and how that's translated into your leadership practice.
There's a lot there. So coming in, I think I didn't start here when it was COVID or right after. And so I'm the newer principal this year. And I think the first thing that I had to do was really listen. And I think as a leader coming in, I had heard, as with any new job, any new position, you hear a lot of things and you have people expecting a lot of things. But it was really important for me to listen to students, staff, and parents. So I started the year during the summer having listening sessions. By doing so, I could really understand what the needs were for the community. I also had listening sessions both in English and in Spanish to make sure that everybody felt welcomed and that it was a space where people felt that they belonged to. And I did it where it was almost like stickies where people get to write down and then they put them up on a poster. And after those listening sessions happened, I took the stickies and I separated them to figure out what's already been going well, What are some things that people would like to change? And what are some of the things that are missing? And some of the things that were missing that people really spoke about, I put up in my office on my wall to make sure that every day I'm looking at those things that are missing. And if it's a small change or something small, for example, Autism Advocacy Month, we have a large population of students with IEPs. I'm estimating it's right around a little over 5% of our students have been diagnosed with autism. And so that's something that we had never done here before. And that is the last of my stickies because then once it's done, I take it down and I put in my plans for next year. And so that is the last sticky that I get to take down. I think it's really important to know historical context of the things that have been taking place, because if I move forward and don't know the historical context, I could try something that's been done and it failed miserably, or I could try something that is traumatizing to others, and I don't want to do that. So it's really important that I understood the historical context and the needs and wants of the community for moving forward. Was my foundation.
Got it. So these listening sessions, it sounds to me like it beyond just getting you those tactical things that you could turn into stickies as your to-do list over the course of the year. You were also using these sessions to dig into historical context.
That's absolutely correct. When people go into new places or systems blind and they don't really ask to dive into the historical context, there's a lot of mistakes that can be made. And it's something that I've learned over the course of my career. And so I think that's really important.
And it's so tempting as a leader to sometimes you have in mind like this vision for what you need to do. And when you have these listening sessions, and this happens to even the best leaders out there, you're looking to listen to all the good things, like things that would be reinforcing of that vision for you. How did you step out of that mindset and then go into almost like a curiosity mode for what the historical context has been around certain things?
You really just have to, number one, know that you have to put your ego aside. So as a leader, it's easy to think that what we do is the most important thing, but that's the exact opposite truth. And know that you have some ideas in mind, but depending on the community and the needs, though the vision may have to be tweaked, right? So that's number one. And number two, you really have to go slow. As much as we have a vision or ideas in our head, it's an understanding that it takes some time to really build that if you want it to be successful. So it's really telling yourself that you have to move slow, even though you think you know what is right. And being curious is one of the greatest gifts that anyone could ever have. I think the whole notion of being curious about, tell me more about, I wonder how, not only does it solve a lot of conflicts, it also gives us a lot of information on things that we need to know.
So I like that. Tell me more about, I wonder how, what are some other phrases that you use to unearth some of this historical context that may not otherwise be very apparent?
What I do is when somebody is writing something down, I'll go see them, or if somebody brings something up, one that I use all the time is, tell me more about. How did this go? How did you feel? What did you think about? Did it work? Did it not work? How do you know? And I guess say through the listening sessions, there's a lot of negativity that comes up, right? Because that's what sticks in our mind as human beings. We remember the times that didn't go well. So I do find out a lot about issues that happened or things that didn't go well, which is good. But I also have to use more questioning to also bring out the things that are going well and that things that are going good.
Got it. And is this something that you have like a list of questions before going into these listening sessions, or does it come out more organically as part of the session?
In the beginning, it used to be a list of questions, and I have to do it because I was always somebody who tried to jump to the end, and I'm a problem solver. So I immediately wanted to solve problems. And so it was something that I worked on of sitting and listening. And sometimes still, it is really tough for me to keep my mouth closed and just continue listening. But I find out good nuggets of information and the reflection practice of going back. And sometimes I'll think I wasn't quiet long enough or I didn't ask enough questions. I think that reflection process helps me and it reminds me of how I need to continue to do that. I did have a list of questions for the listening sessions. I did have specific questions that I wanted to ask. And then what I did with the community group, so it's mostly parents, as they were working. So I didn't stand in the front and have people say things because I know people aren't always comfortable that way. So I like to put people in groups, and they're groups. So it's different parents with different parents. And so they're more comfortable talking about how the school years in the past went and such. And when they're writing down, and I would go group to group and sit down. So it's in a smaller group. And then I'm looking at their poster. I would say, oh, what does this mean? Or tell me more about this. And so that's how I would tease out more information.
Got it.
And I do the same thing with the teachers as well at the beginning of the year.
Oh, okay. So it's pretty much your mode of operating as a leader. It's like that continuous listening process that you put in place.
Yes. Yes, which is very difficult. Very difficult. Yeah. So the listening process and then also getting feedback.
And it's really hard sometimes, and maybe this is just the nature of the challenge facing leadership, because you need to have, as you said, like this vision that you're prepared to tweak, but at the same time, you have to kind of mold it to the feedback that you're getting from people. And when it comes to running the school, you need a certain amount of standardization. You need some processes that are in place, some structures that you put in place for certain things. How do you straddle the two to ensure that you're getting enough feedback without setting the expectations that you're going to please everyone?
Okay. Within my leadership, I do get feedback, but ultimately, I say when it comes down to decisions, I'm going to do what I think is best. I lead that way and I say, but in the same token, I don't have all the answers and I may mess up. And I'm okay saying that I may mess up because we're all allowed to make mistakes. And if we make a mistake, we talk about it and we move forward and how do we tweak it? One of the things that you said, it reminded me, this is where my being in the district office helped me now back as a site leader is I would see folks who were leaders on school site and they would have a vision or they have a mission and they had blinders on and they would just go full speed ahead and forward. But when they're doing that, they weren't carrying people with them. So they were moving ahead in a silo and by themselves, which really didn't get any traction and you're not moving anywhere. And I think that it was great to be able to see that from afar because it's something that I could reflect on and know that we do have to come together as a team. Before I was in the district office, last time I was on a school site, I had a great experience of team building and moving everybody together, right, in the same direction. And that was amazing. I didn't have enough time to reflect on how the process happened. And organically through my next position, having that ability to step back and look, it made me reflect and think about the things that going back on a school site, things to keep in mind, and some of the things that I would do differently. It's really hard to, when you're moving forward and just watching some things, because as a leader too, you have to balance what are some of the things that you are going to make a decision on regardless? What are some of the things you're going to get input on? And what are some of the things that you're going to let go and let a committee do? And so throughout the school day, whether it's bell schedules, whether it's an activity at lunch, a lot of different things that happen on the school site, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. I know that I cannot do all those decisions myself. And I know that I have to balance it of those different buckets of where am I just going to make the decision? When am I going to lead, facilitate it? And when am I going to just let somebody else do it? And when I let a different group do it or somebody else, it's also knowing that I have to let go. So if I've determined that, you know what, that's a good project, that's something that they can do, then that's also something that I have to just let go, regardless of the outcome, but guide them if it's needed. And I think in each of those instances, there are consequences, both positive and negative, right? So if I'm just making the decision, it's 100% on me and I'm not getting buy-in. And sometimes people could say, you didn't get any buy-in and, it didn't go well because you didn't get buy-in. And I have to be okay with that. When I'm leading a group, it's that balance of the facilitation and making sure everybody's voice is heard and still making the right decision. And then when I'm letting it go, I have to make sure that I'm okay with the outcome. And so with all the different decisions, there is that decision of how are we going to come to decide on the system that's being made, the structure, the program, the activity, whatever it is.
Yeah, it does sound like you're threading that needle. I guess that's where the beauty of leadership comes in, right? It's as
Yes.
much art as it is science. And
Yes. It's 100% art and science that sometimes it makes sense and other times they don't make sense and they collide with each other. It's a fun, messy, beautiful process.
yes. And to your point, I think everyone's allowed to make mistakes. And
Yes.
I think as a leader, sometimes those mistakes impact people and more people than if an individual contributor made a mistake sometimes.
Yes.
And that's the burden of leadership that you have to bear. And let's pull some examples out that are specific. So, for example, we were talking a little bit about MTSS and PD, two separate initiatives that touch students and touch the staff. How did you go about building these systems while building relationships with the people that needed to run these systems?
I think the number one thing through the MTSS process and building the different tiers and knowing that is that everyone has to understand where they are within that tiered system. So everybody plays a different role. I'm talking about the adults in the system. And the number one thing is that the clarity of where do I come in. So the tier 1, tier 2 happens inside the classroom. All of the teachers that are inside the classroom really need to understand their role in the tier 1 and the tier 2, the expectation of the teaching that's happening and the learning. The tier 2 is where the students are not necessarily getting the first dose of the learning. We're having data and having that data collection. So then the teacher has to understand, how do I use that data and what differently am I going to do for a small group of students? So I think that the kindest thing, I think, is that the clarity of the role within the organizational system. So if we're talking about MTSS. The second thing, I think, is that the teachers really understand, what does it mean to have tier 1 instruction? What does that look like inside the classroom? What does that mean for the learning? And our instructional leadership team actually built what we want to see in all classrooms. It's not necessarily the curriculum, because the curriculum is what the district has chosen to deliver standards. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, right? No curriculum is ever going to be perfect. And so there are certain great high leverage teaching strategies that teachers can use within the classroom to help deliver the standards. And the standards is what we're looking at. And so through the instructional leadership team, that relationship then really teased out, okay, what should we see in every classroom across our school? And so then sharing that information, once we built that, then sharing that information with the rest of the staff, this is what we've decided on, this we're doing, and then getting feedback. So it's still the expectation of what needs to happen and the clarity of roles. Then for the tier 3 students that we need to go back, we have data that's showing that what we're doing inside the classroom or any extra intervention plot is not necessarily working. It's having that team and that role. And it's a diverse group of adults on campus who come together, and the teachers refer the students. And then we talk about the students of, okay, what is getting in the way? Because inside the classroom as a teacher, they're working extremely hard, right? There's not a minute that goes by that they are not working hard. They're doing what they can. And so throughout the day, they're doing different things, but they're in it. The tier 3 team actually has a view from above, is able to say, okay, what else do we know that's going on? Do we know anything about this student and their family? Or do we know those different circumstances? And we have the time to pull apart, look at all the data, look at health office visits. And so that team then comes together, and then we talk about what we're going to do as the next step for the student before we move on. And I was mostly talking about academics, but this serves also socio-emotional and also behavior. And so the tier 3 team that we have here, they look at all 3 domains because sometimes they're all interwoven together.
Got it. So there's one aspect of creating and setting the right expectations, that clarity of the role that each person plays. But you also talked about getting feedback along the way. At what level does the feedback help you build these systems and structures? Did you have a committee that came up with the roles and responsibilities for everyone and then rolled that out to get feedback? Or was this more of an organic process that happened?
This one was more of an organic process. I had an outline. The one thing that people absolutely can't stand is, in my prior life, I did, or this is what I'm bringing. So that's the one thing I did not want to do. And I had an outline kind of where we wanted to move. So when I brought together the tier 3 team, I said, okay, you guys, this is our purpose and this is what we need to do. What do we see missing? And allowed them to say, okay, maybe we should include this person, or this is something that would be helpful for us. And so that's where the feedback came. I think for the instructional leadership team who really decides on what we want to see in the classroom, that came organically because the district has a walkthrough tool, and the walkthrough tool is 8 or 10 pages long. It's way too much for anybody. I look at it as when you're learning how to swing a golf club or shoot a shot. You can't tell somebody 50 different things. It's 1 or 2 things to get better at, right? In the moment. So we looked at that very long document and we said, okay, what does it mean to be a Luigi Bulldog? And what does it mean to be inside the classroom and to teach? And what do we want to focus on? And that's how we developed what we want to see inside the classroom, the instructional practices, something that they agreed on, and then bringing it to the whole staff. So the instructional leadership team's made of somebody from each of the grade levels. So during their grade level meetings, it's something they can talk to their grade level team about and then also bring it back. And so I think that was really important that there's buy-in. For next year, probably not going to tweak that too much, but we're going to build in a lot more PD surrounding those items. One of the things I believe in is that we have an agreement. So these are things that we want to see, but we can't necessarily expect people to do it great immediately. Everything takes time. So the first thing going in and what we really talked about is that everybody has to be okay with people going in their classrooms, and everybody has to be okay with getting feedback. It doesn't matter what's seen in the classroom right now. So if you have it or not, it's the just getting comfortable with people going into the classrooms. And then next year, we're going to start having a lot more of our staff meetings focused on those specific instructional strategies. And that's as the learning comes, and then that's where the feedback happens. And that then we should start seeing a lot more, no, because learning's happening, a lot more focused efforts, I would say, on the teacher's behalf. Everybody's in their classroom and you're almost in a silo in there. And that's something that people have to remember, that teachers really are in silos all day long. And they're working really hard. And I'm going to say, for the context of this, I'm not talking about anybody at Luigi, but if there was a classroom where the instruction was really bad, I truly believe, and that's the belief that I have to have, that the teacher's not doing it to be intentional. There's a belief that everybody wants to do well, and that's the belief that we pull from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I really like your very intentional approach towards building this system out, where there's that almost like mental barrier that you might have, like just to accept someone entering your space of the classroom, because for teachers, they own the classroom so much.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing that they own it. They feel that sense of responsibility for their kids. And it can be very intrusive for someone to be in that classroom with them. And so
Right.
it sounds like just normalizing that behavior first and foremost before going into any kind of instructional coaching or guidance from that. It sounds like the approach that you're taking. Is that how I'm reading it? Am I reading that correctly?
That's exactly how you're reading it. Yeah, that's exactly correct. It's a process. And you can't start something and expect someone to be 100% great at it, because everyone is different. There are teachers on the school site that would be perfectly fine with me going in there and coaching them and everything else, but there are others who are not. And so that's the balance. You have to really understand where people are coming from and getting to know them so that everyone's coming along together. Because then otherwise you're only speaking to a part of the staff or a part of the group, which then creates othering. And so if we're bringing along the team, we really have to honor everyone's feelings.
That's so great that you're thinking about it so intentionally. And it's very aligned with all the latest in organizational change management theory. You do need to go slow. As the Marines say, slow is
Go
smooth.
slow to go fast.
Yeah, slow is smooth is fast. Even the Marines think that way. There's got to be something behind that.
That's how I always thought of it. I learned really early, I guess, in my career. Long time ago, when I first got into administration, as I was on a middle school, and when an emergency happens, like a fight or something, if you go fast to get there, your senses are heightened and you're not able to see the whole scene. And when you move intentionally and slow, your senses are more open and you're able to see the entire unfolding of everything that's happening, and you gather more information. And so it's almost the same thing in leadership. When you go too fast, you're not seeing everything and you're going to miss some parts, which then in the end, it takes longer to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, there's definitely that illusion of speed sometimes that you
Yeah.
get with as a leader where you can spend, your first 90 days on the job where you're just changing a whole bunch of stuff. I'm trying not to make any political commentary on this show.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and that's I've never seen that in my role in leadership and education. I've never seen that turn out okay when you make a ton of changes within. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about PD as well. And this is something that so many districts struggle with. And how do you approach PD? Because there's everything from the willingness and the relevance of what's being
Mhm.
conveyed through this PD down to even things as tactical as, oh, how do we arrange a subs plan for all the people that had to come out to do PD, and how do we pay for all of that?
There was a lot there that you just said. There are logistically, it does take a lot, but I have a great support system within the office that helps, right? Logistically, make sure that we have the subs, figuring out what budget we pay. I usually say, okay, pay with this budget. In California, you have your LCAP. And so looking at does it number one fall within, and our school plans are aligned with our district LCAP. And that's one thing that's nice. And then so I look at it, okay, what is this activity? How does it align? Which of the LCAP goals does it align with? Or is it the Title I funding that we could use? So I think that's just like the logistics. I think the harder part though is on a site, from a site perspective, is the balancing of what the district's pushing out in terms of PD and looking at the individual sites and what is needed. From a district perspective, and I've been there and I understand that knowing something that like, or let's take, for example, PLCs, right? Everyone's going to do a PLC. So district wide PLC, everyone gets the PLC training. But within each of the schools, there is a certain culture and context, right? So from a district perspective, it's easier to say, okay, everybody gets the same. But then from my perspective as a school leadership, I got to look at how does this work for my individual school site and the culture that is here. So it's balancing that. So that's one thing, the stuff that's coming from the district. Then also with the professional development, like with the teachers that we've identified as a school, is trying to fit that in as well. And then how do I make sure that it aligns with what the district is also pushing out to teachers? Because I want to make sure that the district office is whatever content director is pushing out something to teachers, and I may not necessarily see it. I have to be aware of it because I want to make sure I'm not overloading the teacher or sending a message in a different direction. So I have to be very aware of what that is. And anything that we want to do here and the things that we have and the things that we identified, I figure out a way to align it with the work that's mandated from the district. So that way I'm trying to get it all to not seem so overwhelming and overburdened for the teacher. The other thing too is PD, what we know within research, it's 30 hours, at least 30 hours that someone needs to really delve into the content to make sure that they understand it and that they're comfortable implementing it within the classroom. So the drive-bys, the one days, they absolutely do not work. And so it's knowing that if we're going to do a PD, it has to be sustained and it has to be something that is going to make a difference on the school site. Because if we're investing at least 30 hours, it has to be something that is worthwhile, that's going to benefit our students.
Oh, that's a really good insight. 30 hours is probably almost an entire year's budget of PD for a single teacher.
It depends. Like you could use staff meeting times, right? So if you have
Right.
an hour and a half every Monday, or different schools have different, some have 2 hours once a month. So there's that way. There's some of the release days. So it depends on who's delivering the PD. If you hire somebody from the outside, they don't necessarily know the context of your school, but that also costs money. So it depends. There's different ways to deliver the professional development. The best way is to do it in-house if you get experts from in-house. So one of the things we're focusing on this year is thinking maps. There are 2 teachers on this school site that are experts in thinking maps, and they've done a lot of training. They're trainers of trainers. So at staff meetings, every single time they're up there and they're leading the staff. So that costs 0. So you find different ways to do it. And this is the transition year. When you talk about budget, next year times are going to be a lot leaner for California schools, probably nationwide with all the COVID funds. They're all going away. And so things will be tightened up. I'm already expecting the school budget to be cut probably like 15% because districts are pulling back on money because all the COVID funds are going away. And then that's when you start to get creative and only do things that you know are going to make an impact for students in a positive way.
Yeah, and related to all of that, any PD doesn't stick unless you have that level of reflection, that level of
Yes.
application. And you're big on reflection. You mentioned it quite a number of times on this episode. And I want to dive deeper into that. Like, how do you do that? Do you take some time to consolidate your learning somewhere, like in a notebook, or do you write it down? Or do you like revisit this every school term, every year? Like, how does reflection look like for you?
In a perfect world, I'd set aside time in my schedule, like at the end of the week and reflect on the week. But it doesn't necessarily happen like that. I'm big with notebooks. And so I actually have my notebooks ever since I started in administration. And there will be times where I go back and I look through those notebooks when I have time. And it reminds me of where I was at different periods in my life. Right. And I forget things that I've done and things like that. And it helps me remember. It helps me remember processes, how I felt going through things. But usually the reflection happens when I'm sleeping, when I wake up, when I'm driving, and something will come in my head and I'll think through it and then I'll remember it. If it's not a good feeling, I really will remember it and I'll know that I have to do things differently. I have a saying that you move forward and you act and you lead in the best way that you know possible. If you learn new information that is counter to how you've been acting or leading, then you lead in the new direction. So it's basically you do as you think is what is right until you know better, and then you pivot in that new direction. And so I could always beat up myself over something that I said. It could even be from a meeting, something that I said that I realized that I may have cut somebody off or I didn't give somebody space or sometimes I had my voice was mean or whatever it was. And I could really beat myself up about it, but I give myself grace to know that as long as I'm not doing it again and continuously, that it's okay and I've learned and it's a learning moment. It's a huge piece. Do have a mirror in my office that's like just a small square mirror that sits on a desk. And I have that because that mirror reminds me of reflection, that to
Mm.
continuously reflect.
And how do you use this in coaching when you coach others on your staff and so on? And with the idea of building up others and their leadership capabilities, even if they don't have positional authority today, like everyone really is a leader. How do you project that expectation on others that they have to reflect on their own activities too?
I definitely, when I'm in front of the staff, I talk about reflection and I talk about, I thought about, I tell them, I said, I was thinking about when we did this. So I model 100% that the reflection piece. That's something that's really important that I model, that I do as I say. The other thing is if it's something that's really important that I want someone to change their behavior, I never tell them. I know I have to build space to do it through a reflective questioning. And the coaching is an art. It is a really difficult process that I would say that I'm not an expert in it, but I'm definitely better than when I first started. And it's knowing that it takes a little bit of time and space, and it's having the questions ready to be reflective with somebody so that they are seeing their behavior for themselves or even like within the classroom with instruction. If you want somebody to change something they're doing, it's the same thing as asking questions that are very open-ended where they could see that you're trying to get them to see a certain thing. The easiest thing to do is just to say, hey, I saw this, I didn't like it, I want you to change, but that's not always the right thing to do. There was something recently, I'll say in a different district, that a leader was saying that they do this practice with emails, that they do a practice with an email. They'll send out a bunch of emails 5 p.m. on Friday, and then they don't have to answer. And somebody on my school site was with me when we heard this. And later on, I said, hey, you know what? I know we heard this, but I want to tell you that's not a good practice because what you're doing is you're saying, all this information, or I expect you to do this, and I'm not going to be around to help you work through the information process. If it's something that is important, you need to be there and you need to have that time and space for people to process it. And I said, that's not a practice. So Small things like that can affect, that doesn't necessarily, it's not about that a person's specific behavior, but you want to bring attention to something that you don't believe is a good practice. That's something that I will directly say.
Got it. And I'm curious, what are some of these reflective questions that you use to be able to help someone come to the realization that their behavior needs to change?
I got to think of an example in my head. So let's just say it was a teacher was really mad at a kid, right? This just is like an example. And their behavior was abnormal and they were yelling and they were mean, bringing them into the office, just fed up. So I would say to them, in the moment, I would just, number one, take over and just say, okay, have the student wait here, go ahead and go. Because when anyone is upset or anything, you don't address it then. Later come back and I'll say, okay, I noticed when you came in, you were pretty heated. Tell me what happened. So then it's the other person telling their story. I have no judgment. Just tell me your side. And based on from there is what questions I'd go into. I guess now that I'm reflecting on it right now, it's really about getting the other person to tell their side and their story. It's the one thing, human nature, we want to be heard. And so once we've said our side, then we can talk about through questioning of why do you think it was this way? And then just getting the reflection on the behavior. But it's really about naming. First, you name the behavior that you want to talk about. And then depending on what that is, you start questioning them. And you do it through an open lens with no judgment. And for me, I have to remember to stay open and to stay neutral, regardless of my feelings about that person, right? So that we're able to have an honest conversation and then talk about how we're going to move forward.
I really like that because it's such a fine line to be able to have this kind of exploratory, curious line of questioning and a discussion with no judgment versus what could potentially feel like just gaslighting. In a very inexperienced way, we might go about asking questions like, oh, what else do you think you could have done in that situation? And jumping straight to that. Whereas I think having that whole, tell me what happened, why do you think that happened? What do you think was going on? I think treading that path very carefully really allows you to open up the conversation a little bit more and to hopefully reach that self-realization. And what happens if the person that you're working with doesn't reach that self-realization? At what point do you say, all right, I need a bigger intervention with this person?
If you're getting to it and you're stuck and they're not realizing it, I'll say, let me tell you what I saw and what I felt. So I said, this is what I saw from you. This is what I felt. And this is what I saw on the student's face or whatever it is. And I'll just go to, this is what, from my perspective. And I'd say, could you see how I would see that? And so then I'd bring it to me, right? And when you bring it to, like, if they're not doing the self-actualization or realizing, then if I say it from my perspective's not wrong, just like your perspective's not wrong, right? Everybody has their own perspective. So then usually I've never had it not work. And they'll go, oh, okay, yes, I do see that. So then once that, yes, I see that. Okay, in the future, what is it how should we handle the situation? And there comes a point, if it's major where it's hurting somebody, there will not be that, tell me about everything else. It'll be a direct, let me tell you what I saw, and this will not ever happen again. There's those lines too. But when it's something small that you want to get them to change because you want to keep that healthy relationship and that balance, then it's the coaching questioning.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it goes back to the art and science of leadership. Right? You have different tools that you have as a leader and you apply them using your judgment over time.
Right.
And if you were speaking to somebody who's relatively new in their leadership journey in education, and you had some piece of advice that you'd like to give them, what would that look like?
I would say that, number one, you need to listen. Number two, you put your ego aside. Leadership is 100% not about your ego. You lead with humility and you be humble. There are folks who believe that their title entitles them to be a bully or to, just because they say something, they expect people to follow. But a true leader brings along people because the people want to be led. So you have that relation, they have that vision, and that's how you get things moving. What you say doesn't matter, but what you do matters immensely.
Perfect. What you say doesn't matter. What you do matters immensely. And that whole idea of putting your ego aside and bring people along because they want to be led, I think those are really great points. Thank you so much for sharing so generously your leadership insights with us today, Lisa. And for all of you listening, that's all for the Engaging Leadership Show today. And I hope these insights resonated with you and that you'll be able to take away a nugget or three from this very practical conversation. I've been your host, CT. It's been such a joy. Thank you so much for listening. I'm signing off. And that's all for the Engaging Leadership Show today. If these stories resonated with you at all, head over to engagingleadershipshow.com, all one word, where you can subscribe for free to receive more leadership stories and strategies every week. Also, at that link, you can access the archive of all the featured episodes we published in summary form. It's a veritable treasure trove of educational leadership wisdom distilled for your learning pleasure. Once again, the link is engagingleadershipshow.com. Sign up today to receive the next summary this very week. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and passion, and I'll see you in the next episode.